You've been performing since childhood, smiling when it hurt, apologizing just to be safe. But what if the pain you feel today isn't about what she did, but what you did to survive her? This isn't a kind message. It's not safe, but it might be the most honest thing you've ever heard. Since you were little, you were taught to look outward, to search for someone to blame, to put a name and a face on your suffering. And yes, many times, that name is your mother. But here's what no one dares to say. It's not your mother who still holds you back. It's what your mind did with her. This is an attack. It's not about blame. It's a truth so uncomfortable, very few dare to name it. Because the mother doesn't just live in your memories. She lives in your unconscious. Long after she's left the room, long after you thought you moved on, long after the world said, it's time to grow up, you wake up, brush your teeth, go to work, smile on cue, laugh when expected. You keep moving, keep trying, keep performing. But deep down, there's something you can't name, an ache, a pulse beneath the surface. You think you've healed, that the past is the past. But look again. Really look. Are you truly free? Or are you still living to be seen by someone who no longer sees you? There's a shadow that follows you, not outside, but within. It speaks when you speak. It loves when you love. It shrinks when you try to grow. And you know this shadow. You felt it in every relationship, every rejection. Every time you can't explain why love feels so unsafe. It whispers things you stopped questioning long ago. You must earn your worth. Your needs are too much. Something is wrong with you. And it all began with someone you were told to trust unconditionally. Mother. But the pain you carry now, it's not about what she did. It's about what stayed, what was absorbed, what was never processed. Carl Jung called it the mother complex, a pattern, a prison, a myth that haunts you because you were never allowed to question it. And as long as that archetype remains unexamined, it becomes a god, one you worship in silence by erasing yourself. But what if the story could change? What if healing doesn't come from confronting her, but from reclaiming you? This is not a story of blame. It's a story of return to the child you were, to the self you buried, to the voice you silenced, to the truth you swallowed just to be loved. So here's your first act of rebellion. Stop pretending you're fine, because you're not. You're carrying a childhood no one helped you carry. And I warn you, you won't leave this the same person who entered. Part 1, the child who was never held. There's a child inside you, not a memory, but a presence. Living, breathing, waiting for something that never came. A voice to say, I see you, I'm here, you're safe now. But that voice never arrived, not in the way you needed, not when you were most fragile. So you adapted, you shut down, you held your breath, you became quiet, invisible, good, because being good felt safer than being real. You thought silence would protect you. You thought shrinking would keep the love from leaving, but love left anyway. And so did your voice. Now you flinch when a voice sharpens. You shut down when love feels distant. You overreact, not because you're dramatic, but because no one ever taught you what safety feels like. Carl Jung warned us, what is not made conscious will return again and again as fate. And this is where fate began, in a house where love was conditional, where peace meant being quiet, where silence was called respect, and discipline pretended to be love. Maybe your mother was overwhelmed. Maybe she smiled but never truly saw you. Maybe she meant well. But meaning well is not the same as being present for a child who's afraid. Because a child doesn't analyze. A child absorbs. And what you absorbed was absence, control, emotional unpredictability. So you made one brutal conclusion. It must be me. I must be the reason this hurts. I must not be lovable. That belief became your compass. You grew up, but inside you're still that child, trying to earn love from people who don't see you. You overachieve. You overgive. You overapologize. You call it responsibility. But deep down, it's reenactment. The child inside still waiting for the hug that never came. And now here's the cruel twist. You became the one who withholds it. You now speak to yourself the way no one ever should. You minimize your pain. You dismiss your needs. You betray yourself just to make others feel safe. Because deep down you still believe. Love must be earned. Rest must be justified. Peace is only for the perfect. But the one you're waiting for will not arrive. Not through your mother, not through a partner, not through the world. The only one left to hold that child is you. And that is not a tragedy. It's a turning point. Carl Jung said, "You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become." So become the one you once needed. Not perfectly, not all at once, just present. It starts with a question. When I'm hurting, do I abandon myself the way I was once abandoned? Or do I stop and stay? Because that child doesn't need solutions. It needs presence. It needs someone to finally say, "I'm not leaving. Not this time." That's not self-help. That's repairing. That's sacred. You can't change the past, but you can change how the past lives inside you. So go back, not to relive it, but to rewire it. Not to blame, but to reclaim. You don't have to fix the child. You just have to hold them exactly as they are. No more performing. No more proving. No more pretending you're fine. You're not fine. You're carrying a childhood no one helped you carry. But now you can. Place your hand on your chest. Take a breath and whisper, "I see you. I believe you. I'm here." Because the moment you stop waiting to be held and start holding yourself is the moment your healing truly begins. Part 2, the myth of the perfect mother. You've heard it all your life. She did her best. She sacrificed everything. She was always there. And maybe all of that is true, but truth has layers. And sometimes what's true on the surface hides something far deeper. Let's name it. There's a myth we were all handed. Too sacred a question. The mother myth. She's kind. She's pure. She's selfless. She never fails. And if she does, you're not supposed to notice. You're supposed to forget, to forgive, to make excuses, to keep loving. But that myth is not love. It's a prison. Because when you're not allowed to speak the truth, you start swallowing it. And eventually, you drown in silence. You don't just lose your voice, you lose yourself because you were taught that honoring her meant erasing you. But what if the most dangerous form of abandonment is self-abandonment in the name of love? Maybe your mother meant well. Maybe she believed love meant control, distance, constant advice, criticism disguised as care. That doesn't make her evil, but it doesn't make your pain disappear either. Because pain doesn't ask, was she trying her best? It only asks, where were you when I needed to be held? Carl Jung reminded us, the archetypes we idealize become the shadows we fear. And the more perfect we paint her, the more we shrink ourselves. You love her. Of course you do. But love without boundaries is not love. It's fusion. It's emotional erasure. If you still can't speak your truth around her, tiptoe through every conversation. Feel your throat tighten when she enters the room. Then you're not in relationship. You're in worship. And worship leaves no room for reality. You bring her flowers. Smile on her birthday. Tell yourself she did what she could. And maybe she did. But every year, some part of you dies a little because the love still feels incomplete. You crave a mother who doesn't just appear, but sees, doesn't just provide, but accepts, doesn't just teach, but listens. And when she doesn't, you blame yourself. Not because it's true, but because the myth leaves no one else to blame. So here's the break. She wasn't a goddess. She wasn't a villain. She was a woman with wounds of her own, with ghosts she never faced, with love that may have been real, but still left you cold. This isn't about vilifying her. It's about reclaiming you, because idealization is just another form of distortion, and distortion prevents healing. You can't love her clearly until you see her fully. You can't forgive her truly until you release the fantasy of who you hoped she would be. And that hurts, because it means grieving a mother you never really had. But in that grief is your power. Because once you stop waiting for the perfect mother, you stop betraying your imperfect self. And in that space, you finally say, she was not everything I needed, but I am no longer in need of everything. That's where wholeness begins, not in her perfection, but in your permission to feel what was never allowed. You don't need to protect the myth. Maintain the image. Whisper your truth as if it's shameful. You get to speak it. You get to feel it. You get to leave the altar and walk into your own life, because honoring her isn't about shrinking yourself. It's about becoming someone who no longer needs to worship pain to stay loyal. And that, right there, is the beginning of emotional adulthood. Part 3, the voice that judges you. There's a voice inside your head. You hear it every day, but you rarely stop to ask, where did it come from? Why does it sound so certain? It tells you, you're lazy, you're behind. You should be stronger, more grateful, more perfect. It shames your sadness, mocks your joy, interrupts your peace the moment you start to feel safe. And the cruel part? You think it's you, but it's not. It's a recording, an old script, a voice you inherited, and you've been pressing play every single day. You weren't born with that voice. You learned it, absorbed it from glances, sighs, corrections disguised as care, silences loaded with disappointment. It's the sound of the first mirror you ever looked into. And that mirror was your mother, not always her words. Sometimes her absence, the tension in her body when you cried, the way she praised you only when you performed, the way she said, be strong, when what you needed was to be held. She didn't have to say much. You felt in the air, and your body never forgot. Carl Jung warned, when an archetype is not integrated, it becomes your internal ruler, unseen but absolute, the inner mother, the voice that judges you before anyone else can, that punishes you before the world even has a chance. So now, you don't just remember her, you become her to yourself. You silence your needs, push through exhaustion, criticize your feelings, shame your softness, demand perfection from a soul that's already tired. And the worst part? You don't even know you're doing it. You call it discipline, accountability, being an adult. But it's not maturity. It's repetition. The child still waiting to be loved, now playing the role of their own oppressor. This is how trauma hides, not in invisible wounds, but in internalized voices, in the way you speak to yourself when no one's listening. You say things in your mind you would never say to someone you love, but you say them to you over and over again. Why? Because you still believe that love must be earned, that being hard on yourself will somehow protect you from being hurt by others. But it doesn't. It only deepens a wound. And the saddest part? You've grown so used to it, you think it's normal. But that voice is not truth. It's trauma. It's not strength. It's self-abandonment. And every time you deny yourself rest, minimize your pain, betray yourself to make someone else comfortable, you're not just repeating the past. You're living inside it. So now, you have a choice not to destroy the voice, but to recognize it. To listen, not with obedience, but with curiosity. Ask it, who are you? Whose voice are you repeating? What are you trying to protect me from? And you may hear something unexpected, a whisper that says, I'm just trying to keep you from being abandoned again. That's the root, the terror of being left, of not being enough, of being too much. But you're not too much. You're just unheard, unheld, unseen. That voice is not your enemy. It's a ghost, a survival reflex. The child's attempt to stay safe in a house that didn't always feel safe. But you're not that child anymore. You're not in that house. You're not at the mercy of someone else's silence. You have power now, the power to speak differently, respond instead of react, soften instead of punish. It starts small, in the moment you feel shame, and choose compassion. In the moment you fail, and choose support over self-attack. Carl Jung said, we don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This voice is your darkness, and by looking at it, not running from it, you dissolve its grip, so next time it speaks, don't fight it, but don't follow it either. Pause, breathe, and speak back. I hear you, but I choose differently now. I am not your child. I am my own voice. And that, right there, is how the pattern breaks. Not by silencing the voice, but by replacing it with something truer, something kinder, something whole. Part 4, the war you never chose. You were drafted into a war before you could speak, before you even knew what you meant. A war without explosions, without blood, but one that left scars deep beneath your skin. It wasn't a war you saw. It was a war you breathed. You entered it as a child, and you never left because no one told you it was happening. No one told you that surviving love would come at the cost of yourself. This is the war of unmet needs, invisible rules, silence in place of comfort, fear in place of safety. And so you adapted. You became small, still, strategic, hyper-aware, because somewhere along the way you learned that being seen meant being judged, that needing meant being punished, that crying meant being left alone. So you buried the need, you buried the fear, you buried the longing, and you kept the performance. And now, here you are, an adult, still living as if the war is happening. You panic when someone pulls away, flinch at rejection, over-explain your truth, apologize for existing. You fear stillness because your nervous system doesn't recognize it as safety. It thinks stillness is a setup. Because here's what no one told you. Your nervous system doesn't know time. It doesn't care that the war is over. It only knows patterns. And your pattern was survival. Carl Jung knew the unconscious doesn't disappear. It waits. It repeats until you look at it. So now every reaction, shutdown, panic spiral is not just about today. It's about yesterday and the day before that. And every day you needed love but got distance instead. You live in a present still dictated by a childhood you've never emotionally left. This is the real war, not between people, but between your past and your possibility. Because your past still whispers its rules. Don't cry. Don't ask. Don't rest. Don't take up space. Don't make them uncomfortable. And you follow them, not because they're true, but because they're familiar. But you're not 5 anymore. You're not in that room. You're not locked in that dynamic. You don't have to vanish to be loved. But your body doesn't know that yet. Your instincts still scan every room for danger. Tighten its softness. Treat joy like a setup. Treat peace like something suspicious. And you wonder why you're always tired, but not the kind of tired sleep can fix. This is soul tired, survival tired, the fatigue of decades spent holding your breath, because surviving was never meant to be permanent. And yet, here you are, still holding the pose, in armor, performing strength when what you need is permission to collapse. But what if I told you you're allowed to leave the war? You don't need to earn peace. You don't need to justify rest. You don't need to keep bleeding to belong. You are allowed to stop fighting. But to do that, you must make a new choice. A choice to notice. To say, this feeling is old. This fear is familiar, but I'm not there anymore. That's how you disarm the war. Not by force, but by presence. By breathing instead of running. Noticing instead of numbing. Staying when every cell tells you to flee. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And you've been calling this fate for far too long. But it's not fate. It's memory trapped in muscle, breath, belief, and memory can be rewritten. You don't have to fight anymore, shrink anymore. Prove you're worthy of staying alive. You get to live. You get to rest. You get to exist without permission. And when you do, when you stop reenacting the war and start choosing peace, that's not weakness. That's revolution.